On April 30th, 2025, what began as an ordinary spring day rapidly transformed into one of the most catastrophic environmental disasters in Israel's recent history. A massive wildfire erupted in the Jerusalem hills, quickly escalating into an uncontrollable inferno that would leave an indelible mark on the nation's landscape and collective memory. The initial reports came in around midday when flames were spotted advancing toward Highway 1, the critical transportation artery connecting Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. Within hours, the situation deteriorated dramatically. Witnesses described apocalyptic scenes as enormous walls of fire, propelled by winds exceeding 50 kilometers per hour, surged across the highway. Terrified motorists found themselves trapped in a nightmarish scenario, forced to abandon their vehicles and flee on foot as thick, acrid smoke transformed daylight into an eerie, suffocating darkness. It was like watching the end of the world unfold before our eyes, recounted one survivor who narrowly escaped the blaze. One moment we were driving, and the next, we could see nothing but flames climbing higher than the trees on both sides of the road. Evacuation crisis. As the fire advanced with alarming speed, authorities implemented emergency evacuation protocols across multiple communities. Over 10,000 residents from at least 10 villages, including Beit Meir, Shorsh, Givat Ye'arim, and Ramat Raziel, were urgently ordered to leave their homes. The evacuation process was chaotic and emotionally devastating, with families forced to make split-second decisions about what few possessions they could take. Among the evacuated facilities was the Aitanem Psychiatric Hospital, where the situation took a particularly concerning turn when two vulnerable patients were initially reported missing amid the disorder. The combination of medical evacuation challenges and widespread civilian displacement created a humanitarian crisis that stretched emergency services to their absolute limits. Jerusalem itself was not spared from the disaster's effects. A thick blanket of black smoke descended upon the capital, dramatically reducing visibility and triggering serious health concerns. Air quality measurements reached hazardous levels, prompting health authorities to issue urgent warnings for residents, particularly those with respiratory conditions, to remain indoors with windows sealed. By nightfall, the wildfire had consumed more than 17 square kilometers of land, an area equivalent to over 2,400 soccer fields. Ancient forests that had stood for generations were reduced to smoldering ruins. Agricultural lands that represented livelihoods and heritage were obliterated. Natural reserves housing rare and endemic species were transformed into barren, ash-covered landscapes. The material damage was equally severe. At least 20 homes were completely destroyed, with thousands more left in imminent danger as the fire continued its relentless advance. Infrastructure suffered significant damage, with power lines down and water systems compromised across multiple communities. Israel declared a state of national emergency as the crisis escalated beyond local control capabilities. The response mobilized virtually every available resource. Over 120 specialized firefighting teams were deployed to combat the blaze from multiple angles. 12 firefighting aircraft conducted continuous water and fire retardant drops in coordinated patterns. Elite search and rescue units from the military were activated to assist with evacuation efforts. Medical emergency teams established field treatment centers at strategic locations. The international community responded to Israel's call for assistance, with Italy and Croatia promptly dispatching specialized firefighting aircraft. However, in a development that raised diplomatic questions, reports indicated that Greece and Cyprus declined to send assistance despite having the capacity to do so. On the ground, conditions for first responders were extraordinarily challenging. Access to the worst affected areas was severely restricted as roads became impassable. Visibility was reduced to mere meters in some locations due to the dense smoke and airborne ash. Communications were intermittent, complicating coordination efforts. The medical toll, while not catastrophic in terms of fatalities, was nevertheless significant. At least 20 people sustained injuries, with the majority suffering from smoke inhalation complications and various degrees of burns. Medical professionals observed that vulnerable populations, particularly the elderly and young children, were disproportionately affected by the hazardous air conditions. Ambulances and rapid response units operated continuously throughout the crisis, establishing evacuation corridors where possible and conducting targeted extractions from isolated locations. In some especially precarious situations, residents were advised to shelter in place until rescue teams could safely reach them. Beyond the immediate human impact, environmental experts expressed profound concern about the long-term ecological consequences of the disaster. The Jerusalem Hills ecosystem, known for its biodiversity and ecological significance, suffered catastrophic damage. Ancient pine and oak forests that served as critical carbon sinks were incinerated. Habitats supporting numerous threatened species were completely destroyed. Soil structures that had developed over centuries were compromised, raising concerns about future erosion and land stability. Watershed areas vital for regional water security suffered significant damage. Environmental Protection Minister Tamar Zandberg explicitly connected the disaster to broader climate change patterns, noting that such extreme fire events were becoming increasingly common across the Mediterranean basin. "This is not an isolated incident," she stated. "It represents a clear warning of what awaits us if we fail to address the climate crisis with the urgency it demands." As firefighting efforts continued, attention turned to determining the fire's origin. Commissioner Dedi Simchi of the Fire and Rescue Services confirmed that preliminary evidence suggested human activity was responsible for igniting the blaze, though whether it resulted from negligence or deliberate action remained under investigation. "We can state with reasonable certainty that this fire was man-made," Commissioner Simchi informed the press. "However, we must allow the investigation to proceed methodically before drawing definitive conclusions." He emphasized that anyone potentially connected to the incident would be presumed innocent until proven guilty through proper legal channels. As firefighting efforts continued, attention turned to determining the fire's origin. Commissioner Dedi Simchi of the Fire and Rescue Services confirmed that preliminary evidence suggested human activity was responsible for igniting the blaze, though whether it resulted from negligence or deliberate action remained under investigation. "We can state with reasonable certainty that this fire was man-made," Commissioner Simchi informed the press. "However, we must allow the investigation to proceed methodically before drawing definitive conclusions." He emphasized that anyone potentially connected to the incident would be presumed innocent until proven guilty through proper legal channels. Environmental factors undoubtedly exacerbated the situation. The region had experienced an extended period of abnormally high temperatures coupled with strong easterly winds, classic conditions for extreme fire behavior. These meteorological factors, combined with abundant dry vegetation resulting from earlier seasonal rains followed by drought, created what fire behavior analysts described as perfect storm conditions. However, experts caution that the path to complete recovery will be protracted and challenging. Rebuilding destroyed homes and infrastructure will require months of concentrated effort. Restoring the damaged ecosystems could take decades, with some ecological losses potentially permanent. This disaster highlights the critical importance of effective emergency response systems, sustainable land management practices, and international cooperation in addressing environmental crises. As climate change continues to alter traditional weather patterns across the Mediterranean region, such extreme fire events may become increasingly common without decisive preventative action. What are your thoughts on this devastating event? Have you experienced similar environmental disasters in your region? Share your perspectives and experiences in the comments below. If you found this report informative, please consider liking and sharing to raise awareness about wildfire risks and climate resilience. Thank you for your attention to this important issue. Stay informed, stay prepared, and stay safe.